Chapter 33. Every path is different. Revere each person, revere each path. The following is an excerpt from Zach Weiner's Saturday Morning Breakfast Cereal. A person was happy. One day, a rock fell on its head. A piece of the rock stuck in its scalp, but it did not realize this. It began to hurt in its head. It thought the pain was from something wrong in its life, but it didn't know what was wrong, and it wanted to know. It stopped its daily work, but that did not help. It made pretty things, but that did not work. Because these things did not help, it decided the problem was not with itself, but with the universe. It left its family and friends and took to wandering and contemplation. One day it tripped, hit its head, and the stone dislodged. The pain stopped. It was happy again. It decided whatever it had done before the stone dislodged was the source of the happiness. It told other people why it was happy, and they listened. But they never quite found their teacher's happiness because there was no stones in their heads to dislodge. This difference was taken as a sign of the teacher's wisdom. The teacher had many students, and they wrote down the pattern of the teacher's life as they knew it. The teacher is dead now, but the pattern is everywhere. The students learn it with serious eyes. But if the stone were a person, it would laugh. End quote. So there is this guy named Howard Moskowitz. He is a psychophysicist. That means he measures how we use our senses to observe the world around us. Moskowitz got his PhD from Harvard and set up his own consulting group. He was going to help people figure out what sorts of foods they liked. Back in the early 70s, Pepsi came to Moskowitz with a problem. Aspartame was new. Pepsi wanted to use aspartame to sweeten their new Diet Pepsi drink. They wanted Moskowitz to figure out exactly how much aspartame to put in the new drink so that soda drinkers could enjoy the perfect Pepsi. Moskowitz got to work. Pepsi already knew that there was a certain spectrum of sweetness that was acceptable for most soda drinkers. 8% sweetness wasn't sweet enough, and 12% sweetness was too sweet. Moskowitz had a very straightforward approach. He would make sodas at 8.1%, 8.2%, 8.3% sweetness, and so on up to 11.9% sweetness. He would have hundreds of taste testers try the sodas out and rate the soda's quality on a scale from 1 to 100. The expected result is that you should see a bell curve, where scores are higher for values near 10%. The results were a mess. There was no distinguishable pattern at all. There were spikes in perceived quality at what seemed to be random values. What happened? Most psychophysicists wouldn't care. They would have been content with concluding that 10% sweetness is a compromise for the perfect sweetness value. But Moskowitz was not content. Moskowitz pondered. Why was the data so random? What was really going on here? And then the universe collided into a beautiful moment known as Moskowitz's realization. There was no such thing as the perfect Pepsi. There are only perfect Pepsis. Moskowitz spent a great deal of time trying to find a firm that would let him try out his new philosophy. Many didn't understand what he was trying to say. Vlasic Pickles came to him and asked him to make them a perfect pickle. His wait was over. Moskowitz said that you need to improve your regular pickle and you need to make a zesty pickle. That's where Zesty Pickles came from. The next firm to ask for his help was Campbell's Soup. Campbell's made Prego. In the 1980s, Campbell's was struggling against its competitor Ragu. Moskowitz got together with Campbell's Soup Kitchen and made 45 varieties of spaghetti sauce. There are many ways to vary a spaghetti sauce, by the way. You have qualities like sweetness, tartness, sourness, tomatoiness, level of garlic, and level of visible solids. So Moskowitz took those 45 different sauces and spent months having hundreds of people rate the sauces on a scale from 1 to 100. The results were in. Once the data was analyzed, Moskowitz found that all Americans fall into one of three groups. People either like their spaghetti sauce plain, spicy, or extra chunky. That may not sound important, but in the early 1980s it was groundbreaking. It was groundbreaking because there was not a single can of extra chunky tomato sauce being sold at any supermarket. It was a completely untapped market. Over the next 10 years, Campbell's would go on to make $600 million off of their line of extra chunky sauce. There is no perfect tomato sauce. There are only perfect tomato sauces. How did this happen? How did the food industry go so long without realizing this fundamental idea about food preferences? A part of the problem is that people don't necessarily know what their preferences are. All of the research and data gathered from questionnaires indicated that there was no overwhelming preference for extra chunky tomato sauce, and yet 1/3 of America secretly craved it. Instead, people tended to answer with the normal plain tomato sauce that was already being sold at supermarkets. They answered with what they knew. Moskowitz's findings are profound. Industry truly believed in the idea of perfection. There was this idea of a holy grail for perfect dishes. But we are all different. We all have slight differences in how we perceive the world through our senses. But now, when you go to the supermarket, you see about 3 million different versions of olive oil and mustard. Why? Moskowitz. That's why. Moskowitz listened to us better than we listened to ourselves, and he pulled our truest desires out of us. Genetically, we are all different. Even if two people had identical DNA at birth, they would experience a different environment if ever so slightly. Epigenetic effects caused by different environmental factors would turn certain genes on and off. This biological bias towards seeing the world in a slightly different way means that there is no such thing as a perfect anything. There are only optimal conditions that are different for each of us. Our differences go deeper. Researchers at the Enneagram Institute discovered a biological basis to behavior that can be verified through blood tests. It's called the 9-point personality system. We have these neurochemicals floating around in our bloodstream and our brain. The three that matter for this personality system are norepinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine. Norepinephrine is like adrenaline for the brain. The more of it we have, the more we think. Dopamine should be familiar to you. Go eat your chocolate bar. You'll feel it. It's that feeling of happiness. Serotonin feels good too, but in a different way from dopamine pleasure. You know when you feel good, when you get approval or respect from others? That is the feeling you get from serotonin. It turns out that everyone has a different baseline for these neurochemicals in their body. There are a lot of interesting behaviors that result from different combinations and levels of these chemicals. If you have a high base serotonin, you don't need to be reminded to be positive. If you've ever met a person who seemed obnoxiously positive every single day, then they had a high baseline for serotonin. If you have a low baseline for serotonin, you may be a sort of negative Nancy, having a bias to only see the threats in a situation. If you are low on dopamine, you may find it difficult to be entertained. Compare that to someone who seems like they are always having a good time, and you find someone with a high baseline in dopamine. Norepinephrine levels are going to be higher in people who can't stop thinking. They may even have problems trying to fall asleep. Likewise, someone who is content to relax and not think so much, which isn't necessarily a bad thing in certain situations, will have a low baseline in norepinephrine. The great thing about all of this is that once you become conscious of your biases, you can do something about it. If you know you are perceiving the world too negatively, just by being aware of it and working on seeing things in a more holistic way can help. If you are too positive, you may not be giving yourself the time to reflect on what your sadness is trying to tell you. Ignoring any signal or emotion for too long has its consequences. These differences in sensory perceptions and neurochemicals shape our perspectives. The experiences we have and the knowledge we gain further develop the unique way in which we interface with the world. This is part of the reason why certain information stimulates us. Why are some people fascinated by chess, and why do other people not care about it? Why do some people like to learn by reading books, while others like to learn through a more hands-on approach? These fundamentally different perceptions are not good or bad. It's diversification. Diversification is great. We needed diversification to survive up until this point. Genetic diversification is useful at helping us avoid total extinction from a single environmental change. A diversified way of looking at the world is extremely valuable too. I don't really care about bees, but bees are important. They cross-pollinate plants and keep the plant kingdom thriving and viable. Without them, there would be a stark decline in the plant population that could put the human race, as well as the rest of the ecosystem, in a crisis. I need people to care about bees for me. They may be the one thing that saves my life one day. I was never going to take the time to start my own bee farm and study bee behavior, but some people actually have the passion to do that. They are driven by bees. Your perfect tomato sauce is not going to necessarily be someone else's perfect tomato sauce. Your problems are going to be different, which means your solutions are going to be different. You may be a staunch member of a culture who wants to keep everyone the same because you think that is best for them. You may be someone who learned a better way for yourself, and you want to tell everyone else how to be happy your way. There is no perfect way. There are only perfect ways. Campbell's didn't know how people felt about chunky sauce for decades. They couldn't solve their problem because they believed their way was the best for their customers. The customers believed this to be true too. They didn't even know the solution for themselves, but Moskowitz got feedback. He informed Campbell's of his feedback. Campbell's offered their solution to the public, the horse was led to the water, and this time, the horse drank. When we try and tell others about what makes us happy, we are only giving our autobiography. Don't confuse someone else's answer to happiness for your own answer. When we try to spread our happiness, we may mean well, but I urge you to be cautious. Disinformation is more harmful than ignorance. Present your case and let people decide for themselves. Unique perspectives offer unique problems with unique solutions. Diversity is a strength. Revere each person's perspective. Know each person is different. Know each person has their place in this world. Does that mean you think anyone can just do whatever they want? It's not that I think people should do whatever they want, but rather they already can do whatever they want. I don't have a say on what others do. I can only have a say on what I do. We can make laws, but laws can be broken. We can threaten others with violence. That threat can only deter so many people. There is a difference between someone's point of view and what they choose to do with that point of view. That is the nuance. Respect the unique path. Respect the being. But everyone is capable of unjust acts. Who someone is and what someone does are distinguishable insofar that the person is conscious and aware of their thoughts and actions. When we are conscious, we have a choice. We cannot control who we are. We can only realize who we are. It's like getting a hand dealt in poker. That is your hand. Acknowledge it and respect it. If you deny it, you aren't going to be able to make good decisions. Now, what are you going to do with the hand you were dealt?